Okay. I've been going through some different historic religions and mythologies, looking for the sources for some of the monsters and creatures we interact with in D&D and other TTRPGs. And I noticed something I wasn't even looking for. Or rather, a lack of something. As far as I can tell, there's almost nothing in games taken from Native American, First Nations, indigenous cultures. Sure, in some previous editions of D&D, there were a few attempts at working with ancient Mesoamerican and South American cultures, but I can't find anything from North America. Well, other than the horribly poorly interpreted and poorly adapted idea of a Wendigo that they insist on sticking antlers on. So, I'm Métis myself, which for non-Canadian audience members means my family has been a mix of Native and European ancestry for a very long time. In my family's case, since 1806. This is why I'd like to see this, lack of I don't want to say representation, but lack of interest in these stories. I'd like to see that at least partially remedied, to some degree. There are tons of deep and exciting legends and histories and stories across more than 200 independent and interacting cultures and nations that existed when and before Europeans arrived in North America. Whether we're talking about the Vikings arriving in Lanzo Meadow or Columbus hitting the beach about 400 years later. Obviously, we're not going to be able to bring everything into game terms, but we might be able to do one here today. I'm just going to scroll down a little bit. You've seen me do this before if you've watched any of these videos. I wanted to choose one creature, one idea that covers a large area and has matching descriptions through multiple different cultures. And I think I found one. The Old Owl, sometimes called the Owl Woman or the Old Man Owl. Not only do the legends and descriptions match for what it looks like, but for its behavior as well. What it eats, how it attacks. And there's even fossil evidence that show such a creature really existed. But let's start with the cultures. Those that saw and interacted with this thing and the names and descriptions they gave it. Okay, it's got a list. I gotta scroll down again. The Yamaka called it Tataklea, the Owl Man, and it was a long-legged owl big enough to carry away people. The Ojibwe and the Cree called it Gaianwe. It was a giant owl that hunts anyone who wanders alone in the woods. The Chiniki Stoni called it Batpa, and it was a big owl that stalks and eats people while they're alone. Scrolling down further, the Kootenai, they called it Old Man Owl, and he steals and eats children. The Coast Salish called it the Owl Woman, and she hunts and eats children, and she dances on the children before she eats them, which would likely be kicking them to death. The Shuswap call it, see if I can pronounce this, Tutu Asun Shakis, and it was a giant owl that scavenges dead bodies. The Okanagan had one also, but I couldn't find their name for it. They described it as a giant owl that kills deer and children, and its screams were loud enough to cause fear, and it stood as tall as a man. We now have the interior Salish named it Slalakum and said it steals children and nests in tall treetops. And the Cascadene, way north, they told stories of the owl woman, who was a giant owl who stands as tall as a woman and that calls out to people who are grieving. And the thing is, this was a real creature. Not a mythical being. Or at least it was real at one time. There's partial skeletal remains of a Strix species, being a barn owl, or something closely related to a barn owl. Ornomegalonyx, try saying that fast, was also known as the Cuban giant owl. It was a long-legged creature, like a secretary bird, but it was a barn owl, it was a Strix. And it stood around 3 feet tall. It's the largest named species of owl found in the world before this point. So the remains in North America are too fragmentary to determine and name an exact species. They're bigger than the Cuban owl, and they've been found spread over a large portion of the continent. Sort of an angle across from Florida to as far as the Yukon. They're Ice Age fossils. The first ones were found in the 70s in the state of Georgia. Its talons are bigger than a man's hand. It would have stood over 5 feet tall. And like the Cuban giant owl, it was a long-legged barn owl. And likely kicked larger prey to death after attacking in a dive, like most birds of prey do. Now, think about what a barn owl looks like. Specifically from the side or from behind, the silhouette and the color. Mottled tan light browns with grays and whites at the edges, little tufts here and there, smooth coat of feathers. And picture it standing side by side with a Northern Cree or a Dene or an Inuit, with the heavy winter garb, brown tanned leather long coats, with a loose hood pulled up over their head, insulating fur visible along the edges. Now from a distance, do you think you'd be able to tell them apart? See, our ancestors in North America really did have to contend with monsters. And like any other culture, they told and remembered stories about their experiences with them. So how do we bring something like this into D&D? We've already got a description. We've got several different names we could use, but I think a good general term would be owl people. We know its size. We know it nests in tall trees and will attack and eat medium and small creatures. I don't think a deer is big enough to consider a large creature. I might be wrong. Most deer I've dealt with are well under 200 pounds and well under 8 foot tall. Most times even if you count the antlers. We know they attack in a dive like most birds of prey, and they will stand over their prey and kick it to death before eating it. We also know they will carry away what they kill, if they can, or if anything or anyone around them might interrupt their meal. We also know that it was an Ice Age creature, megafauna, so to speak. So it would likely fit into subarctic boreal forests and mountains, or in deep winter settings and conditions. I think it's a pretty good amount of info to start with. All we really need is a stat block. I'll show you what I came up with. Pause it if you need to. It'll be up there for about 10 seconds. Okay. I think that should about do it for today. Let me know if this is a monster you'd consider using in your games. Is there something you would change about it? Do you want to try and draw it based on the descriptions I was able to find? And do you think I should research more Native American inspired monsters, cultures, creatures to bring them into D&D? Either way, as always, like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you next time.